Picture this. You're 8 years old, maybe 9. It's a family gathering, Thanksgiving, a birthday, some cousin's something, and the house is loud in that specific way that feels almost physical. Ants laughing too hard, the television competing with itself, someone's kid running in circles around the coffee table shrieking for no reason anyone can identify. And you're in the corner, not hiding, not sad, just watching. You've got a plate of food balanced on your knee, and you're doing what you always do, cataloging. You notice that your uncle laughs louder when he's nervous. You notice that 2 adults on the couch are smiling at each other, but their shoulders are turned away. You notice the dog has gone to sit under the table, and you think, same. Nobody's checking on you. Nobody needs to. You're fine. You're always fine. They called it shy. They called it well-behaved. Your teachers wrote quiet on every report card like it was a neutral observation, rather than a whole personality. What nobody told you, what nobody thought to say, is that you weren't just sitting in that corner. You were running a full psychological operation. Section 1. The Science of Being That Kid. Here's what developmental psychology has figured out about children like you. Temperament isn't a choice. It's partly wired in. Researchers have found that somewhere between 15 and 20% of children are born with what's called a highly reactive nervous system, meaning their brains process sensory and emotional information more deeply than average, more neurons firing, more connections being made, more everything. Psychologist Elaine Aron called these kids orchid children. The name is intentional. An orchid in the wrong environment wilts completely. In the right one, it becomes the most extraordinary thing in the room. Same child, different conditions. If you were an orchid child, you felt everything a little louder. A tense dinner wasn't just uncomfortable, it was data your nervous system was urgently trying to sort. A raised voice didn't just startle you, it echoed. You learned early that environments weren't neutral, they had textures, and you became an expert at reading them. For some of you, that sensitivity had a specific job. Maybe the house you grew up in had an undercurrent, not necessarily dramatic, not necessarily dangerous, but tense in the way that certain households are. A parent who came home and changed the energy of the whole room. Arguments that lived just below the surface of every meal. And without anyone asking you to, without anyone even noticing, you became the thermostat. You monitored the temperature. You adjusted yourself to keep the peace. Psychologists call a version of this parentification, when a child takes on emotional labor that belongs to the adults around them, not because they were asked, but because their nervous system was so attuned, so alert, that it felt like the only logical response. You weren't being quiet because you had nothing to say. You were being quiet because you were working. Section 2. The texture of it. Do you remember the specific feeling of being in that corner? The carpet, maybe? Or the cold kitchen tiles if you drifted away from the noise? The way sound became muffled when you pushed your back against the wall, adult voices turning into something almost oceanic, rising and falling without meaning. You could breathe there. You could think there. You had a whole inner world that nobody got a tour of. Maybe you were writing stories in your head, replaying conversations, rewinding them, imagining different endings. Maybe you were watching 2 people interact across the room and already knowing, with a certainty you couldn't explain, that something was off between them. You were, without any formal training, becoming a student of human beings, and you carried that into adulthood. Section 3. How that child became you. Fast forward. You're at a work event. Fluorescent lighting, someone's birthday cake, a colleague who just cornered you to explain his entire opinion about the parking situation. And 45 minutes in,
You can feel your social battery dropping in real time, like watching a phone screen dim. By the time you get home, you don't want to talk to anyone. You just want to sit in a quiet room and decompress for an hour before you feel like yourself again. Or this: you're the one your friends call, always, the one they vent to, the one who listens without rushing to fix things, the one who says the exact right thing because you've been reading people's emotional states since you were 8 years old and eating a plate of food in a corner. It's a gift. It's also, some nights, completely exhausting. Or this: you're in a meeting and you have something to say, something genuinely good, and you watch the moment pass because it didn't feel like the right opening. You think before you speak, always, and in rooms full of people who speak before they think, that can make you invisible all over again. The overthinking, the people-pleasing, the way you'll spend 3 days analyzing a conversation that the other person forgot about by the time they got to their car. The quiet child didn't disappear. They just grew up and got a job.
Now here's where we need to hold two things at once, because everything we just described, the sensitivity, the vigilance, the emotional labor, that's not just a wound. Some of it is a superpower so ordinary to you that you've stopped recognizing it as anything special. The empathy. You don't just understand people, you feel them. You walk into a room and you know, without anyone telling you, who's struggling. That's not common. That's not small. The inner life, the creativity that lives in people who had to entertain themselves from the inside out, the writers, the artists, the people who build entire worlds in their heads and then one day put them somewhere. The moral compass. Children who learn to read emotional environments early often develop a finely calibrated sense of fairness, of wrongness, of when something isn't right, even when everyone around them is pretending it is. And the depth, the way you'd rather have one real conversation than 20 pleasant ones, the way your close friendships look less like a social network and more like a chosen family, slow built, quiet, and absolute. But here's the shadow, and we're not going to skip it. Some of what was adaptive then isn't serving you now. The hypervigilance that kept you safe in a tense house is the same thing waking you up at 3 in the morning to re-examine something you said 2 Tuesdays ago. The instinct to stay small, to not take up space, to make yourself easy. That was a strategy. It was a good one once, but you're not 8 anymore, and the room isn't dangerous, and you're allowed to take up space now. The work isn't to erase the quiet child, it's to update the software. Section 4. Re-narrating the story. Here's what I want you to sit with. That child in the corner wasn't broken, wasn't behind, wasn't missing something that all the loud kids had. That child was paying attention when no one else was. They were holding emotional weight that wasn't theirs to carry, and they carried it anyway, without complaint, without a name for what they were doing. They were protecting the peace in whatever room they were in. Sometimes their family's peace, sometimes just their interior one. They were strong in a way that looked like nothing. And the things they built in that silence, the observational intelligence, the emotional depth, the capacity for rich inner experience, those weren't consolation prizes for being overlooked. They were the actual shape of who you became. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If you could go back to that room, that loud, chaotic, overwhelming room, and find that child in the corner, plate of food on their knee, back against the wall, watching everything and being watched by no one, what would you say to them? Not to fix them, not to toughen them up or tell them to speak louder, but knowing everything you know now about sensitivity, about empathy, about what it costs to be attuned to everyone else before you learn to be attuned to yourself, what would you say? Take a moment with that, because that child is still in there, and they've been waiting for a long time to be told
that they were never the problem.